Order, February 16th, Thursday. First thing we have up, I want to recognize Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a guest today, and we're going to have our hearing first, the chairman says. So I wanted to make a note so when we start to work the wind bill, recognize someone in the room who's helped us out through the interim committee process. So if, Ben, if you could stand up. This is Ben Hutch. He was with NCSL and from the ag side and the energy side, and he's the one who set up our FAA conversations, our DOD conversations, and worked with us as finding the state legislator from Colorado and then also North Dakota with our staff behind us, setting up our fact-finding mission from what we did at the interim. So I just want to recognize Ben. He's here with Aviation Day, and he won't be able to stay for the whole meeting, but before we got started, I told him what we were doing today, that to let everyone know how helpful NCSL was on pulling this data together with staff, and appreciate Ben. And he's coming back to the state because he's really impressed with Kansas. So thank you, Ben.
Good, thanks for coming, and glad you're coming back, yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and jump into our hearing. First, we're going to get through this hearing, and then we're going to work our bills. It's Senate Bill 144. Nick, you want to give us an overview?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem.
So Committee Senate Bill 144 would amend the Video Competition Act in statute. Just briefly, the Video Competition Act. What this is unless a video providing entity already has a valid franchise agreement in effect in 2006, and that's still in effect and valid, any other entity who's seeking to provide video service in the state must file an application with the KCC to get a state-issued video service authorization certificate. What this certificate gives to a video service provider is it grants that video service provider the ability to provide video services in any city or county within that service area footprint that's set forth in that KCC certificate. The act then establishes certain duties, requirements, limitations, both upon municipalities, counties, and cities, and upon video service providers under the act. So, for example, video service providers are required to provide video service within 5 years to all households in the service area footprint, comply with city, county, public right-of-way ordinances and regulations, alert customers to public safety emergencies. Municipalities are also, as I said, authorized and limited by this act. They are authorized to collect a video service provider fee, which cannot exceed 5% of a video service provider's gross revenue. They can impose certain customer service standards and may require a video service provider to provide capacity for no more than 2 public access channels. They're prohibited from establishing any other fees, any separate fees except for taxes, requiring the video service provider to set forth specific technologies or use specific technology or facilities, and then they're also prohibited from regulating the rates of the video service provider. So what this bill would do, Senate Bill 144, it would amend this act and it would exempt the following providers from the requirements of the act. So providers of direct-to-home satellite services that do not use the public right-of-way to provide those services would be exempt from the Video Competition Act, and also providers of video programming, essentially that is accessed over the internet, including streaming content, would be exempt from the Video Competition Act. So these providers would not be required to obtain that state-issued video service authorization, and they wouldn't be subject to the limitations and requirements of the Video Competition Act. It amends that definition of video service, and I would encourage you to look at that definition as well. There's a definitional update that in that definition says that video services are those that are provided through wireline facilities owned, controlled, constructed, or operated by a video service provider. So, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We have questions for Nick. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick question. So would this bill, without this bill, would, if you have your business and you want to put a YouTube video out there about your business or something, would you be subject to franchise fees and things without this bill in place?
I mean, it's all dependent upon those definitions of whether you're providing video service to the, under the definitions of the act. I don't believe cities would be charging you a franchise fee to put out a YouTube video or anything like that.
But they could without the protection in this bill.
If you're
Well,
providing,
I think there was a court case, or there was a case going on down in Fort Scott where they were trying to, I believe what this bill is trying to stop the platforms like Netflix, them, like YouTube from being charged, because I think you're paying the fee already on your broadband. So
And we
I
don't
don't,
piecemeal all our,
I think this bill would make sure that you wouldn't be charged. That's my guess. But
what I'm
I think we got a proponent that can explain it better than I.
great, thank you, appreciate that.
so yeah, if you're doing video programming services through wireline facilities located in, at least in part in the public right of way, then you could be charged.
This bill would
And you'd be under this act, yeah.
You'd have to have the, I believe, the infrastructure in the public right of way, so, you know, you might already be paying it through the broadband.
We don't want any more fees and charges, so
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Not seeing any, we'll go ahead and move on to our first proponent, who's virtual, Damon Stewart, Dish TV. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman Olson and members of the Utilities Committee. I'm here on behalf of Dish Network as well as DirecTV and their hundreds of thousands of subscribers in the state. There are approximately 300,000 families and businesses that subscribe to their satellite services, and about another 100,000 subscribe to their streaming services. That would be Sling for Dish and DirecTV Stream for DirecTV. The exchange rather, just before I came on, I think largely captured a lot of what I wanted to say, so I'll be brief. I do want to emphasize what this bill does not do. It does not change any state policy, public policy. This is a clarification bill, and its intent is to maintain the status quo. In fact, and I'd also just like to note that we've worked with Cox, incorporated some of their language, as well as had discussions with the KCTA and Comcast, and are happy that they, as I understand it, neutral on this bill. Another thing that I would presume the committee would care deeply about is fiscal impact, and this bill has no fiscal impact. There's no city in the state that is collecting franchise fees on streaming services. There's no city in the country that is or has collected franchise fees on any streaming services. But we need the bill, as Mr. Chairman, I think you alluded to. There are a number of cities, including Fort Scott, that are, I would say, creatively interpreting this 20-year-old statute. They came up with a new interpretation last year. They filed a class action lawsuit against Hulu, Netflix, although it applied to all the streamers, is successful. And it's an attempt to get the streaming services to pay cable franchise fees. In fact, I should clarify what I said earlier about no fiscal impact. That's not entirely correct. If this body does not act on this bill, and if Fort Scott is successful, there will be significant fiscal impact on every family business in the state that has the streaming service. They will get a brand new 5% franchise fee on all their individual services. So for example, it'd be a new 5% fee on Hulu, a new 5% fee on Sling, on Amazon Prime, and so on. And so what this bill would do, it's one page, I think it's 4 sentences, would just make it abundantly clear that the intent that was always there from the start is that streaming services are not subject to franchise fees. They have no facilities whatsoever in the right of way. And I just would want to also note, if it's helpful to the committee, I was here last year, some may remember talking about this bill. We'd also introduced a similar bill in a few other states late in session. And in Georgia, for example, with pending litigation, late in session, that body passed this bill almost unanimously. In Louisiana, we introduced a bill late in session, pending litigation, passed almost unanimously. Ohio, they actually passed it in a special session, pending litigation, almost unanimously. And in Arizona, passed almost unanimously. There was no litigation yet, but I think we just beat them to the punch. That is really all I have to say. I just want to be available to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill to the attention of the legislature and for helping out families and businesses here. I know a lot of families in my area utilize streaming services, and I'm thankful that you brought this bill forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Not seeing any? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Is there any other proponents? I just want to ask that. Not seeing any. We have two opponents that are written. Do we have any opponents in the audience? Not seeing any. We also have a neutral that's written too. Is there any neutrals in the audience? Not seeing. Not seeing anybody else to testify. Do you have anybody have a question? Go ahead, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard the comment that there wouldn't be any fiscal note, and yet we did get one saying that the Kansas Corporation would just lose $4,000 in revenue. I'm wondering if our revisor can show me in the bill where this would eliminate the state-issued authorization for the video service provider.
Nick?
Yes, so on page 2, the definition of video service excludes, and under current law, commercial mobile service provider. Number 2, this would be new, a provider of direct-to-home satellite services. So that would be excluded from the definition of video service. And then number 3, a provider of the programming over the internet, including streaming services. So those would not be considered video service under this act, and therefore would not be subject to the state authorized video service certificate.
Thank you.
Other questions? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 144. Okay, let me get my notes out. We're going to start, my intention is to work 144, but we're going to start with, we'll go ahead and start with 166, and then we'll do 49 after that. 166 is a bill we heard yesterday, and do you want to pass out that amendment? The parties that worked on the bill, they drafted some language to clarify what they were doing a little better. And Nick, you can go over that language if you want.
Okay, committee, does everybody have it to look at? I just want to make sure you guys have it. So what this would do wouldn't change anything in the underlying bill, but it would add a few provisions here. So what this would do is it would say, notwithstanding any protective order, essentially, that the commission would otherwise be authorized to issue pursuant to state law or the rules and regulations adopted by the commission. The commission shall not limit the disclosure of the names and addresses of the landowners that are required to be included with a transmission line siting application. So that's paragraph 1 there. The commission shall not limit that disclosure. Paragraph 2 looks backwards, and it states that any protective order that was issued by the commission prior to July 1, 2023 that limited the disclosure of that information, specifically the information relating to landowner names, addresses of record, that part of the protective order shall be null and void only to the extent it applies to the landowner information. It also does provide that only except as otherwise provided in that paragraph, this paragraph shall not be construed to limit or affect any other protective order issued by the commission on any other document, data, contract, information, trade secret, or any other commercial information that has been issued a protective order by the KCC. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, if I could ask Nick a question.
Go ahead.
Does this, and I'm sorry if I'm a little confused on that, but does this allow a property owner to opt out of having their name disclosed at all in this process, or is that not really a factor here?
I don't believe that's a factor, is it? Or
This doesn't specifically contemplate that. It does prohibit the commission from adopting a protective order with names and addresses of landowners, though.
my understanding, they've always published the names, you know, and so,
Of where they're intending to go, right? Yeah, okay, okay.
and this would stay with that. Are there any further questions? Do I have a motion on this amendment to adopt this balloon? Okay, Bowers makes a motion, Thompson seconds. Any questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against nay? Okay, the balloon's adopted. What's the pleasure of the committee on Senate Bill 166? Would someone like to make a motion? Go ahead, Senator Thompson.
Yes, I move that we pass Senate Bill 166 out as amended favorably.
Okay, we have a motion. Senator Warren seconds. Any questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against nay? It passes. 166 headed to the floor as amended. Okay, now let's move on to our next one. Why don't you go ahead and pass out the amendment and 49, and then we can kind of explain what we're doing there, and you can explain the amendment. Right, yep. This is amendment, and I think Senator Thompson, you can talk about it a little bit after Nick kind of gives us a background, but the parties all kind of work together to come up with the majority of this. There's one thing that's left out, and you see the blank there on the retroactive date. There's two different dates, and I think it'd be good for the committee to debate the two different. Okay. Well, I'll explain it as on that part of it. The two different dates that we'll either put 7/1/25 in there for the retroactive to start, or 1/1/26. Well, yeah, don't give me, I just want to put one in there. And I believe there'll be another amendment after this at the end by Senator Bowers. And this is Senator Thompson's lighting bill. Go ahead, you can start in. I think everybody has a copy. No, let's let Nick, and then I'll let you, okay?
So committee, this is on Senate Bill 49, and what this is doing is essentially it's combining Senate Bill 46 into Senate Bill 49. So that subsection B that you see there is was this basically subsection A of Senate Bill 46, applying retroactively to wind energy conversion systems, with the trigger being install that light mitigating technology system within 6 months after execution of a new power offtake agreement. If you flip to the back page, you see the definition for power offtake agreement from Senate Bill 46 has been included. In addition to the term, this means a long-term agreement contract. So that has been included in the definition for a power offtake agreement. If you flip back to the front page, subsection C replaces paragraph 2. And what paragraph 2 was doing, if you remember, was relating to the KDOT Aviation Division and the authority for KDOT Aviation to grant an extension of time to that 24-month period. What subsection C does now instead is that it requires a vendor for the light mitigating technology system to submit notice to the Kansas Department of Transportation Aviation Division regarding the installation of the system. And then if it exceeds that 24-month period, the vendor of that light mitigating technology system would be required to submit notice once every 3 months, just generally to provide an update on the delay and the current status of the installation progress. And this does authorize the KDOT Aviation or KDOT to establish kind of uniform policies and forms that would be submitted under this notice provision. And Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions, and that date does need to have some committee action on it.
Okay, questions for Nick? Not seeing any. Way I'd like to do this before I hand this to Mr. Thompson is just leave that date blank. We adopt this one, and then we'll debate the date. Go ahead, Senator Thompson, why don't you explain how these negotiations kind of come about and how it all, and I thought that was a really good group of how everybody worked together. So go ahead.
Well, it was a collaborative effort, certainly. The discussion really was not so much of the prospective. I think the agreement always, going forward was the fact that, the wind companies agreed that this is the new wave of the future going forward for this industry and a new standard allowing for the aviation lighting detection systems. So the real negotiations were not around the prospective or future installation, but rather the current existing turbines and what the proper way of triggering the necessity for them to be required to add these systems. There are various negotiations, but we settled on the new offtake agreements as being the trigger, meaning that whenever one of these existing industrial farms signs a new power purchase agreement, that will be the trigger going forward for them to apply to the FAA for application. I think the only potential heartburn here is that there are a couple of the wind farms that are in existence that may have just signed some new longer-term agreements so that people up on, say, Highway 36, there are several big farms up there, Soldier Creek, Irish Creek, I think, may be sitting there with 10, 15, 20-year agreements. That's probably the biggest bugaboo in this whole thing is how do we fix them? But the vast majority of the rest of these existing fields, we were assured that it would happen a lot faster. That there's various links to these power purchase agreements that would be the trigger, and therefore it would move it forward. And with regard to the vendor being the application, that actually came from Senator Peterson. A good idea he had, because the vendors have the, they have the desire to get these things done. And so they're not going to drag it out any longer than they have to so that they can get paid. So this just basically puts the prospective and the retroactive together. And then the only thing, as Senator, the chairman indicated, was negotiating the date of the onset for the retroactive. And we can discuss that when we get to that point. So
Okay.
that's just kind of the general overview.
So do we have a motion to adopt this balloon? Senator Thompson?
Yes, I make a motion to adopt the balloon amendment on Senate Bill 49.
Senator Peterson seconds it. Okay, any questions on it? Anybody want to ask any questions? Oh, Senator Fag?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why don't we have a date on that before we do that?
Well, we're gonna debate the two different dates.
Okay.
And I think, you know, there was a kind of agreement, but then some people hadn't talked to their clients, and the fairness of them, we put that original date in there premature, and I think it wouldn't be fair to them. They hadn't talked to their clients when we negotiated. So I pulled the date out, and I said, I couldn't think of any other way of doing it, what's fair for Mr. Thompson and all the industry. So I thought, let's just debate it here as a committee, and we'll figure out the date where retroactivity starts. It's one's July 1st, 25, and the other's January 1st, 26. So we're talking about 6 months, but yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, Senator Fag.
Yes, it does.
Is there any further questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the new paragraph B, which talks about having to apply, is this, apply to the Federal Aviation Administration for installation and operation of this technology within 6 months after the execution of the power offtake agreement. So I'm trying to figure out how would the companies know what numbers to put into that funding? You know, I mean, my understanding was this would be significant cost, but they're not going to know now when they make that power offtake agreement if the Federal Aviation Administration is going to approve this system or not? And
You want to take that, Senator Thompson?
Sure, thanks, Senator Francisco. I think generally when we listen to the two companies, DTECT and I can't remember, Terma, I think it was, they generally indicated here in Kansas, because most of these farms are fairly flat, that generally they think one radar system can handle it. What they do is they have the one radar system that feeds all the various turbines in the farm. If it's a bigger farm, it might take two. But generally, they're talking about, I think, 1.5 million per each radar system. So if it were particularly large, I think they would have a pretty good guess, you know, depending on the size and scope of the field, how much it's going to cost them roughly anyhow. I think, you know, minimum 1.5 or somewhere thereabouts, and maximum if it had to have two. If it was really stretched out, you'd be talking about $3 million. But again, remember, one turbine these days costs $5 million, somewhere in that vicinity. So say a 100 turbine field, it's only adding the additional cost of, say, one turbine or a portion of one turbine. That'd be I would say they could probably estimate fairly closely.
That answer your question?
My question was really, if the Federal Aviation Administration did not approve this, then that would be a reduction in cost.
Absolutely would, absolutely would, because then they wouldn't be required to install that. And again, this all goes to the FAA, and I believe because they can site the individual turbines on a map. Part of the field may be available for approval and part may not, depending if it's close to part of it's too close to an airport. So you could probably utilize it for part of the field or part of the installation and not all of it. I don't, you know, and again, that would be up to the FAA determining which turbines qualify and which do not.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Not seeing any? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against, nay? Passes. Okay, now let's move on to the date. I'm waiting for a motion on one of the two dates. Senator Corson.
I'd make a motion that the date be January 1st of 2026.
Do we have a second? Senator Peterson seconds. Any questions or comments? Senator Thompson.
Yeah, the only heartburn I have with that really regards these existing fields that have signed these, and I know we're only quibbling over 6 months, but again, the farther out we go, the more potential we have of new purchase agreements being signed that creates the issue that they're having in north central Kansas. In other words, of extending the longer period of time for the existing turbines before they have to require to apply to the FAA. So it actually harms those existing fields, the people who live around it. It would extend the time they're having to look at the blinking lights. So that's why I suggested the earlier date, just to try to capture that. And I think that was part of the discussion we had when we originally heard the retroactive part of the bill. So I'd leave it to the will of the committee, but I will probably not vote for this amendment.
Senator Peterson.
I was a strong supporter of the July 2025 date. I thought it was a good compromise. Then I found out there were some RFPs that had been issued and some people already working on contracts that might cause an issue that wouldn't happen with the January 1st, 2026. And there was a general feeling among the parties that we didn't want to affect existing contracts, so that's why I'm supporting the 2026.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a statement and then a question. A contract's a contract. We got to be very careful about breaking contracts. You know, that leads into everything else. So my question is, all wind farms in Kansas, are they okay with this January 1, 2026? Is all the owners okay with this kind of date? Okay, that's my question.
Senator Thompson.
Yeah, with regard to the contract's a contract, we're not breaking the contracts. All we are doing is adding the requirement for them to apply to the FAA. So it really has nothing to do with the contracts. And if they're available or if they realize that this is coming on July of 2025, then they can adjust the contract to add to the compensation that they need to cover the cost. So we're not actually breaking a contract. We're just adding a requirement that they add the aviation lighting systems. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I just want to state, because of the FAG question, there are some of them that are all right with the July 1st, 2025 date, but all of them are all right with the 1/1/26 date. But there's some that are not all right with the July 1st date. Are there further questions or comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just comment that there has been discussion before in this committee about a desire for light mitigating technology systems to be installed. So it's not like this is the first time these entities have heard that there's interest in having this done. I would say that I appreciate the fact that the industry has come forward with a fairly clear way to accomplish this, and it didn't take a lot of discussion in the committee. It also is not going to help everyone who came and talked to us about this concern.
Sure, and to be, just one other comment, to be fair, as this was talked about last year, one of the things that some of the parties that want the 1/1/26 date said it was referenced that would probably be the date when it was talked about before. I don't know, I don't remember, but you know, I don't want to get too much into it. Senator Fagg, you got one question, and then I think we're going to vote on this.
I got one
Comment, I guess.
Chairman, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Probably the chairman laughed at this. Technology is ever changing.
Sure.
And I'm thinking of, how do we know 2 years from now that the lights we make them go out and put $1.5 million, $2 million into, that they end up with some other device that goes up there that don't even have a light on it? I mean, we don't know what tomorrow holds and that kind of thing. So I'm just,
Sure.
if that happens, well, we could be addressing that kind of thing here again. So
You
just
might
comment.
be, I won't, but
Yeah.
Senator Thompson.
Actually, this bill anticipates that because we didn't limit it to these two different particular companies for one thing, anticipating that the technology may change. And then with regard to that, as more of these fields, not only in Kansas, but in other locations, add this, the cost may start coming down. So, as the demand goes up. In fact, I talked to the two companies, DTECT and Terma, and they anticipate this. So they're gearing up for this. And so as they buy in volumes, there's going to be some economies of scale. So I think it's, for them, they're ready for this, and they do anticipate that. But, with regard to the radar technology, they are upgrading it to a different band of radar that's easier to detect birds, for example, things of that nature. So these companies have a head start on anybody else, but you don't know where we're going from here, and that's right. But this bill does anticipate that. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
so, okay, one quick one, then we're gonna.
The amendment that the committee adopted last year was 2026.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and vote on January 1, 26 amendment. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against nay? Okay, I think we say the ayes pass, won that. Okay, I believe we got one more amendment, the Bowers Amendment.
Yes, Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead and
Chairman.
pass that out.
And before we talk about this amendment, to me, it's a transparency issue. And we can talk about it here in a second, but I do want to talk about the staff behind us, because I have this 3.5-inch notebook up here of what we did in the interim committee that has brought us to this point. The Select Committee on Lighting decided to send out two bills, one retro, one moving forward.
One thing before we get too deep in it, on your B, it says January 1st, 24. I believe that date would be January 1st, 26.
So we'll change that. Nick just gave
Right.
us the nod back there.
Not a problem.
Okay, so I'll continue here then. So I would say the last year was public comment, and we heard it really loud and strong. And then this committee that we had in October was more, like I mentioned, the fact-finding mission of how do we come together to solve this problem. And I do want to commend a senator from Colorado, and he's retired now, but he did say, because in Colorado, their bill just moved forward, but he said, there is something I wish I had tried, and that was the power purchase agreement. So that's where the trigger came from. That didn't come from industry. It didn't come from our ideas from committee last year. It came from someone who had been there, done that. And we heard that, and it made perfect sense on a way that we could move forward with the industry, looking at it, being prepared and not being punitive. So that was a very important part. We also heard from a North Dakota gal, and I can't remember, Lindsay, was she the Public Service Commission? And they did do retro full bore with penalties if they didn't meet the guidelines. We didn't want to do that in our committee. So these are the two ideas that we just merged. My thought, there's one piece missing, and
You want to let Nick go over it maybe? And
okay, you
let's
talk
let
about it,
Nick
and then
do
I'll
that,
give you my
yeah.
reasoning why I asked Nick to prepare it and tweak
Okay.
it a couple times.
Go ahead, Nick.
So committee, Senator Bowers asked that the two bills be combined. So this was combining both bills. I don't want to speak for Senator Bowers, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the main point of this amendment, you can disregard everything else except for that bolded language. Everything you guys have already adopted has been essentially contemplated and voted on by the committee. It's this bold number 2 that would be the new provision that you guys are adding. I did fail to mention last amendment that there was a striking of light intensity dimming solution, and I now see that in Senator Bowers' amendment. So I hope that wasn't a make or break thing, but that was stricken from the definition in the prior amendment you adopted, but the bold language is what you are adopting in this amendment. And this bold language does authorize any county to enter into an agreement with an owner or operator of a wind energy conversion system for the purpose of financing or helping finance part or all of the costs of a light mitigating technology system within that county on the wind system that's in that county. This would be subject to the approval of the FAA. And then this bold section does authorize the county to issue revenue bonds for that purpose and to pledge any revenues that are associated with the wind energy conversion system or any other revenues that the county wishes to pledge towards those revenue bonds. The provision also provides that any costs associated with ongoing operation and maintenance of that lighting system would be borne in whole by the developer, owner, operator of the system and not the county. The county would just be financing that initial installation of the lighting system.
Okay, go ahead.
I think Nick he says it very well. My point was, I want the county commissioners in each county, not just the new ones coming on, knowing that they can use county funds, whether it's funds from a wind farm or funds that they have, if their community would like to have these lights up sooner. Because as Senator Thompson mentioned, the newest ones coming on, they're 20 years out. Hopefully, they're more like 10 years out. But that they have an option to make this faster, but it would be a vote of the local people or vote of their county commissioners, that this doesn't prohibit them from doing that, and I just want to let them know that they can.
So like, a lot of the wind farms make concessions, like revenue, so they'd probably use that revenue to offset the
So
bond.
they could do that or other funds of their county.
Okay.
So it's local control, and the vote is with the county commissioners.
Okay, any questions on do we have a second? Okay. Pittman seconds. Any questions or comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this may be helpful to just remind the county commission that they may do that, but my understanding is even if the county wanted to do it and even if the county came up with the money, there is no requirement that the operators of the system would have to go along with that. Is that the case?
I hadn't contemplated that. I don't know, Nick, does this speak to any of that?
So this authorizes the Board of County Commissioners to enter into an agreement. So there would need to be some negotiations that occur in order to effectuate that agreement. This would not require a wind energy conversion system owner to enter into that agreement. They would be negotiating with the county on with those funds.
Go ahead, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My other question would be, if they're entering a contract, why are we limiting them to not contracting for the ongoing operation and maintenance of that technology? I mean, why are we saying they can enter a contract, but the contract can't include that maintenance or ongoing operation?
Well, Nick, and that is how the amendment was written, so I'm not quite sure if we discussed that point of it. It was just assumed that this would be the way it would be handled. I would hope in the negotiation piece would take care of that consideration.
I really kind of see this as a tool to, there's a cost, and I know some counties get revenue. So I'm guessing most of the time that revenue would be used to retire these bonds. This is a tool to pay for it over 5 or 10 years, is what I see. So I really just see this as another tool. I think, the wind farms are going to try to do the best they can. So I don't think you can put a hammer in there on them. I don't think that would be fair.
And that certainly is not my intent. My intent is to let the county commissioners know if they want to move faster, they can borrow the money. However they want to make their payments, that's up to them. But they would have the control to do this. But the other part is education. We could have just talked to them, but I think in statute that they realize that we mean this, that there is a way moving forward that we wish it would have been quicker than 10 or 20 years, but here's a way they could make it go faster if they could negotiate and work out all the details. That's my intent.
Well, and this is not the end of the road, but this is, we're winding down for today. I would, we got a motion and a second. I would like to adopt this, and if we need to tweak it in between here and the floor, I'm sure there's plenty of people in the audience would help that. So, I don't know. I'd like to leave it at that. Anybody else have any questions? Senator Thompson?
Yeah, Senator Francisco does have a pretty good point there, but I do think that, on the other hand, this gives the county commissioners a little bit of protection from having to agree to pay for ongoing maintenance. They'll pay for the system and then hopefully negotiate. But I do think county commissioners, in a lot of cases, don't totally understand what they're doing on some of this stuff, so this gives them a little bit of a guidance that, yeah, okay, you can finance it, but it protects them. But I think Senator Francisco does have a fair point there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm guessing without this, the county commission would not be able to go acquire the funding to do it because they're going to have to pay for it over time. So they're going to need this bonding tool to be able to actually pay for it, unless Mike Fagg's giving a loan.
Mr. Chairman, I think, excellent point, and we can work on an amendment on the floor if you'd like. Of course, it has to go through the House process too, so we have lots of time to get this right. This is a very good attempt in transparency, but also local control. That was my intent.
I think we pass it, and then we can always tweak it, or whatever the committee wants to do. Senator Francisco, real quick.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. I think one concern would be that the farther out you are, the more the ongoing operation and maintenance cost will affect that power purchase agreement. And so what I would hope we would do would be to make sure that those long-term agreements are the ones that can be addressed. That's my concern.
Okay. Any further quick questions or comments? Not seeing any. Let's go ahead and vote on the Bowers Amendment. We have a motion and a second. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? It's passed. Okay, do we have a motion on the whole, the Senate Bill 49 as amended? Senator Thompson?
Mr. Chair, I move to pass out Senate Bill 49 as amended favorably.
And give our reviser a little leeway to.
Yeah, for the tweaks on the amendment so that we fix the light dimming and the date, I believe it was.
Senator Warren, seconds. Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? Passes. We got another one out. Okay, now let's move on to the bill we heard today. If we get our work done today, we are done until after turnaround. Senate Bill 144. What's the pleasure of the committee? I'm sure everybody remembers it. We just heard it. Yeah, Senator Thompson.
Yes, I would move that we pass Senate Bill 144 out favorably.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second? I'll second it. Any questions or comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did get some written comments, and we only received that at the beginning of this meeting. So I do want to say I think some significant work went into trying to address those changes or help us understand, and I think doing this so quickly doesn't give that a fair hearing.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we got a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? You want to be recorded? No? It passes out. 144. So our work is done. If you guys want to take your folder, you're more than welcome. We'll probably start a new folder, second turn around. So you have the bills on the floor. These will all be below the line next week. Thank you. Huh?